I actually think that this is a three-pronged answer. So the first part of the answer is that we as humans have always had a biological drive to make sure that our bodies have enough salt. So I think that we've been evolutionarily we're designed to seek salt. So that's one thing. However, what's happened is that our diets have changed. So instead, we used to have a diet that was incredibly low in sodium and incredibly high in potassium. And now our diets are exactly the opposite. And now our diets are incredibly low in potassium and incredibly high in salt. So I think that this evolutionary pressure that we used to have because our diets were so low in sodium, it actually drove us to seek and find sodium. We still have that ingrained within our physiology. But unfortunately, in today's environment, like I'm indicating, we have way too much salt. So that's part number one. So it's an evolutionary drive. The second is that salt intake is somewhat of a learned behavior. And as babies, we're actually given baby food that has been enriched in sodium. I'm sure that parents probably taste the baby food, they eat it, they like it, they probably think, oh yeah, this is delicious peas, and then they go ahead and feed it to their child. There has been a movement to actually reduce the amount of sodium in the diet and even in the baby foods. Again, as an attempt, because once we learn and we begin to like sodium, it's really, really difficult to unlearn that behavior. So we have this evolutionary pressure. We're exposed to sodium really, really early during development. And that leads us to sort of a sodium hunger or a sodium appetite. That then when we ask individuals, okay, for your health, you need to cut back on sodium, it creates this really amazing push-pull. So people grow up thinking, oh, these foods are delicious because they already have sodium in them. The beautiful thing about all of that is that sodium is a learned behavior. And so once you start reducing the amount of salt in your food, the foods will actually taste better. You'll actually be able to taste the constituents of the food, and you can actually unlearn that sodium appetite. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah, so a lot of people think that, right? People think that, oh, all I have to do is just stop using the salt shaker at the dinner table or at the breakfast table or wherever you're eating, and that's a great way to reduce your sodium. And that is helpful. However, now what we're finding is that the sodium in our diet is predominantly coming from the foods that we're eating. It's because instead of eating a more natural diet where we're actually preparing the foods from scratch, we're eating diets that are highly processed. A processed food or a processed diet would be those that were all you have to do is just add water and heat it up in the microwave and it's ready to go. Or you just pull something out of the freezer and it's a complete entree ready to eat. It's anything that takes a very small amount of time to prepare, and all of a sudden you're eating it and it's delicious. And those are the products that are incredibly laced with sodium. Sodium is put in those products to enhance the shelf life of those products so that they can stay on the shelves longer. For example, our breads now are super enriched in sodium just so that they can be shelf stable for some period of time instead of having to buy a fresh loaf of bread every day. Now you can buy it like once a week and sometimes even once every 2 weeks, and some of them are even lasting a lot longer than that. So what we've done in our food economy is we've added salt to almost all of our foods in order to enhance either the flavor, the perception of the flavor, or to enhance the longevity of that product. So it's a great idea to reduce the amount of salt that you're shaking on top of your foods, but it'd be really great if we could go back and actually begin to cook our foods from scratch like we used to do. Yeah, so this is a really interesting one. So now, I mean, salt is the rage. Like there are even restaurants called Salt where you can go in and they have like 95 different flavors of salt that you can put on your food. And sea salt is one of those. So the sea salt crystal is slightly larger than the sodium chloride crystal. So the idea is that because you're putting the sea salt crystal, which is larger, you might actually use less of it. So therefore you would be getting less sodium. But in actuality, it's probably you're not really saving much by switching from regular salt to sea salt. And again, because we're talking about the fact that the salt shaker is not really where the problem is, just having your potato chips that are seasoned with sea salt versus regular salt, if you actually read the sodium label, you'll find that there's not an appreciable difference between the sodium content of those two different products. This is a really important point, right? So again, I'm going to go back to my first statement, which is we've had this huge shift in our diets from diets that originally were incredibly high in potassium and low in sodium to now diets that are incredibly low in potassium and incredibly high in sodium. And so there's been a movement afoot. Actually, potassium is now listed as a nutrient of concern because we're eating such a little amount of it. And there's an incredible wealth of data about the benefits of potassium in our diet. Where the data come from that show those benefits of potassium actually comes from people who eat plant-based foods that are high in potassium. There are concerns, and the data originally were derived for people who have chronic kidney disease. If individuals such who have chronic kidney disease and the kidney has the ability to normally filter the potassium out, when kidney function declines, then you no longer have that ability to filter the potassium out, and you are at risk for hyperkalemia or high blood potassium. So those individuals right now have been asked to really reduce the amount of potassium that they get in their diet. This is incredibly confusing, and it's an emerging topic of interest and research. And that is that there now is a large amount of data to suggest that individuals, even with impaired kidneys, might be able to eat foods that are enriched in potassium, but should avoid potassium supplements that you might find within salts. So I would say if a person is looking for a cardiometabolic healthy diet, even has maybe some concern over their kidney function, it still would be advantageous for them to eat foods that contain potassium and avoid those that are potassium supplements that you might find in salt substitutes such as new salt or any of those above. So again, let me just try to restate this. This is an ongoing area of research. We are trying to determine if even people who have failing kidneys, if they can benefit from the health benefits of potassium if they eat some of the foods that are actually enriched in potassium and avoid those that have potassium supplements added. So I would say that the elevator pitch is try to reduce the consumption of processed foods. Instead of having a box of macaroni and cheese, make the macaroni and cheese from scratch. Instead of eating a frozen dinner, actually make a dinner from scratch. And reduce the amount of fast foods that you're eating. Those are all simple, easy ways of really, really reducing the amount of sodium that you're getting in your diet. I would also say that I think that the data suggests not only while you're reducing these processed foods, but also pick up foods that are high in potassium. I like to think potassium and sodium as having this yin-yang sort of effect, and so such that you increase your potassium intake that can facilitate your kidney's excretion of sodium. So I would say not only reduce the processed foods, but then also incorporate fresh fruits and vegetables, which will provide the potassium, which can really offset the negative effects of the sodium. I just think that sodium is one of those things we've known for a long time that people need to really reduce their sodium intake. It's hard. In order to get your sodium intake down into the levels that are being recommended, you have to cut out a lot of breads. You have to cut out all your processed foods. You can't put any salt at the table. But I think that you can do it one step at a time. And I think that what you can do is you can actually enhance the flavor of your foods by adding limes or lemons or natural seasonings, which will really bring out the flavor in the foods without having the sodium. And I think it all comes back to the fact that we also need to go back into the kitchen and learn to cook again. We sort of started to do that maybe during the pandemic, but I think we need to really go back there because that's the healthiest way to live, and also to incorporate those fresh fruits and vegetables.